Happy Friday, everyone. Let me just get something quick out of the way before we start talking about BRICS. Metals Investor Forum is on today and tomorrow. I'll be going down there in Vancouver. Here we are in Vancouver. So that's going to be excellent to go catch up with a lot of companies and some presenters and hear what other people think of the market right now as we go into another major news announcement. I was off on Wednesday. It wasn't 25 basis points, but 50 basis points by the Fed. That had an immediate effect on the market. It's pulled back a little bit today, but very, very strong for the stock market. And of course, an extreme diverse opinions on whether that was the right thing, the wrong thing, whatnot. We'll sift through all of those different opinions here in the short term here. But we wanted to kind of focus in again on this BRICS idea because once again, we talked about correlation and narrative and everything else, and it's important to look at this because it's a lot of people don't pay attention to it, don't even know it exists at all. And to me, that seems stunning because it is a serious thing and it is happening, and it may not be as big a thing. Maybe it is something we're blowing out of proportion. I don't think so, though. But it all started off in 2001. I'd mentioned this before. It's a Goldman Sachs product. That's a little thing that people don't rarely mention. It was Jim O'Neill from the Global Investment Research Division over at Goldman Sachs who wrote a report entitled "Build Better: Global Economic BRICS." And this was basically a product to acknowledge that in the future, those groups would be massive drivers of GDP, of global GDP, and that there was a big opportunity there. Now, for a long period of time, he was derided and not really respected for this concept. A lot of people didn't really think too much of it. I will also mention, just as a funny side note, Jim O'Neill is actually his actual long name is Lord Terence James O'Neill, Baron O'Neill of Gatley. If that wanted to put things into context as to how important this person is. But once again, this was just a concept and an idea and a product that Goldman Sachs was selling. And they make tons of products. They sell research and everything else. This one, looking back, you'd say, wow, this was very smart to see that this was happening. Now, at the same time, Peter Thiel of companies like Palantir, PayPal, he's good friends with Vivek Ramaswamy, JD Vance. They're all friends. They went to school together. Peter Thiel is I enjoy listening to. He's got a very good global perspective on things, and he spoke about how, like in the 2000s, there was a big push from the U.S. in particular that they would be able to influence China by giving them technology, moving all the manufacturing over there, giving them lots of opportunity to build out that. With the hopes that just like Russia, Soviet Union, that they would be able to defeat communism with money, and it didn't work. So, of course, China isn't entirely communist. I mean, it is the Chinese Communist Party, but they have a semi kind of stock market that's sort of quasi open. It isn't the same as over here, but we don't have quite as much as an open and honest and straightforward market as one would like to believe here as well. I mean, it's pretty clear when you're looking at narrative and even with CNBC acknowledging that there's two different economies that are playing out here at the exact same time. And this ties into BRICS and why this is happening is that if you're well over a millionaire, and that's a lot of people, your experience of the economy is amazing. You're having the time of your life. Everything's great. So if you're a billionaire, yeah, things are amazing. You've got no issues, no problems. But if you're 99% of the population in the West, you're struggling. So your experience of the economy is very acutely different. And that's why we see on the news, yeah, maybe they're doing misinformation on purpose, but other times it's just they're out of touch. They have no concept of that. Even in Vancouver, people are struggling. And this is an exceptionally wealthy place. That's a very transitory city with lots of money coming in and leaving. A lot of it doesn't stick, which is kind of part of the problem with the entire globalist kind of idea, is that you're going to attract all this wealth and they're going to stay and build businesses. They don't, but that's another conversation. That does tie into the BRICS thing, because it is, once again, coming back to this idea of ideologies from a kind of globalist perspective, where you're led with the idea of, diversity is our strength, whereas that is not what they want. The progressive ideology is not about diversity at all. It frowns upon it. It's indoctrination and hammered on you. You have to think this. You have to celebrate this. You have to, and that's it. And a part of the BRICS, I would say, as a social political institution, is a reaction and a rejection of that. We're not interested in that. We don't want you to force your culture, your beliefs upon us. And I would agree 100% with that, regardless if it was an extreme conservative approach, like if it was U.S. manifest destiny, or if it was colonialism. I mean, and that's what progressivism is. It's just a neo-colonialism, where they're trying to force upon the rest of the world a belief system that they think that is correct. And like all things, I say to people is, if you don't have a good argument for it, and you can't win someone over with the argument, then it's not a good idea. And that's a very naive way to look at things, but it isn't, because you have to have the nuanced understanding that we're not all the same, and we all don't want the same things. And this, once again, brings me back to BRICS, is that maybe it is high time that other countries that choose to want to live a separate way and in different ways have that opportunity and ability to do so. So from 2001, I mean, this BRICS idea didn't gain very much traction, was rarely talked about, wasn't a big thing. And still today, it's kind of like how when we would talk about the World Economic Forum 3 or 4 years ago, before the lockdowns, even on Twitter, people would say, that's just a conspiracy theory. And you go, well, I don't know what you mean by that. It's an actual group and they meet. Now, some of the like conjectures out there as to, are they dominating the world and global? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of conspiracy theories you can derive from it, and I'm sure you could find all sorts of interesting YouTube chats about it. But it itself isn't. It's kind of like a club that people go to, just like if I'm going to the Metals Investor Forum, where people go and share ideas, and there they talk about mining, but at WEF or at these other things, they talk about other things. Now, I touched on BRICS, going from being this Goldman Sachs idea of an economic financial instrument and kind of a product, and kind of said, well, isn't it interesting that somehow it could be the vehicle from which it separates from the U.S. And that's very interesting that a U.S. investment bank has kind of championed this cause. And on that, I wanted to kind of put that specifically from Lord Jim O'Neill, that, quote unquote, the way BRICS has developed in emerging markets is not really what I intended. I never encouraged them to develop a political club. It has made the framework much more durable and has added to its longevity. The recent decision to expand has now become highly political, and I'm not sure what fruitful purpose it serves other than being a club that the U.S. is not a part of. Now, that is very interesting on a lot of key ideas. And this is, one could say it really strengthened as a reaction from the sanctions put on Russia, for, kind of thrusting countries that looked at and said, regardless of your take on whether or not Russia should invade Ukraine or not, they'd say, well, wait a second. The U.S. just, in the last couple of decades, invaded a whole bunch of different countries for, weapons of mass destruction, which we know is BS, and for a whole other different reasons. And that was okay. We shouldn't sanction the U.S. We shouldn't be angry at them, because that was good. That was the good guys. But if the Russians go in to Crimea, which is historically Russian, or if they go in and make a claim on Ukraine, which was historically Russian, that's evil. Now, I know people don't like to hear that. And I don't necessarily think that, if you go back in history, you can make this claim. It doesn't really matter. They did invade. So they invaded. And no one likes war. It's not a good thing. And I wouldn't encourage that. And there's been so many lives lost, and it's horrible. But that has now escalated to a huge point. And we've seen this reflection on buying of gold. So before I continue with kind of talking a little bit more about the BRICS story and whatnot, we'll have an article up on our website. Let's look at, say, this is updated for 2024. Let's take a look at the number one BRIC repatriation or who has the most amount of gold. Obviously, United States, number one, I'm just going to round the numbers off. 8,000, just over 8,000 million tons. Germany, 3.3. So the big jump down, huge jump down compared to US to Germany of 3.3. And some would argue that this 8.1, is it real? That's, lots of newsletter writers that talk about, is that actually in Fort Knox? Is it underneath the banks in Wall Street? Is it this? Is it that? Do they actually have the gold? I don't know, because they don't. You have to take them at their word. I mean, like all information and data, you have to take a government at its word that they're giving the real numbers. Italy, 2.4. That's a bit of a surprise one. France, 2.4. Russia, almost, so 2.3. They've escalated up, and I'm going to bring up a chart here in a second. Quite high. China, 2.2. Switzerland, 1. Japan, we're getting lower, but India then pops up. Netherlands, and then 11 just outside is the International Monetary Fund. Now, why does that matter? Well, we see a lot of these BRIC countries buying gold, and that has led people to wonder, okay, is it that they're going to make this gold-backed security? That's all speculation, and it's great storytelling. It's great. It's a great idea for, especially those in this space that talk about mining, talk about precious metals. It's no end to the possibilities of we're going back to that type of system. I don't think we are. I think there'll be some sort of tokenized blockchain system that builds in all commodities. And I think the U.S. is going to do it. I think that BRICS are going to do it. Hopefully we can find some sort of middle ground and not escalate into a further complete separation. But at the same time, I would argue maybe it's not bad having two different systems. You have a SWIFT system, and then you have another system. And that system, I believe here, what's called the System for Transfer of Financial Messages, SPFS. That's a Russian one. Now, of course, we won't be able to get to use that even if you wanted to. Or CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System out of China, is another alternative. These are tiny. They're very, very, very small. But they're being built and they're being done. And it gives some of these BRICS nations an alternative to say, we want to be able to settle outside US dollars, in part because we see what happens if we don't do what the US wants. They'll put sanctions on, they'll do this, they'll do that. And that's always been the case. I used to laugh that people would talk about U.S. diplomacy. They'd say, well, U.S. diplomacy is that you have a meeting and then you just say, this is what you want me to do. If you don't do it, well, then it's just immediately, it's kind of like when you have a moat in a fort, we're just going to cut off all ties. We'll put sanctions on you. If that doesn't work, well, guess what? You get an army. And that kind of, one could argue, that's kind of what happened. Let's look just quickly, briefly, without going into the big history of all of these ones, some of the countries that have attempted to do any type of coming off the U.S. dollar system. Libya, Gaddafi. Well, we know how that turned out. He had a plan for a gold-backed dinar, and that worked out pretty brutally for him when he made that announcement and attempted to do that. Venezuela. They sought to reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar in 2017. Now, one could argue and look at that and go, well, look what's happened there. I think the GDP of Venezuela has dropped by 80%. They have some of the largest oil and gas reserves, and they've totally destroyed their country. But that's a factor of going communist rather than actually going independent, like, say, Argentina, and saying, we want to build up our country. We want to put money back into it to help grow it in an open market. We don't want to go to the worst common denominator and drive the economy down. And that's another interesting country that's in the spotlight often when we talk about coming apart from the U.S. dollar. China, of course, it's the world's largest oil importer, and it had really built up the yuan, and it has its own yuan-denominated oil futures contracts that was on the Shanghai exchange I believe 2018. So they'd already kind of taken baby steps to separate from that as well. Saudi Arabia being the biggest U.S. dollar partner. I mean, that's the petrodollar, the U.S. dollar, and Saudi Arabia. They chose not to renew its agreement after 50 years, and that was a news story, but just kind of blew past very quickly. And that's a big deal. Like that's very big. Who are some of the other countries that we see? North Korea. Well, I mean, you don't really need to talk too much about. It's a communist, authoritarian state. It's totally devastating to live there. I feel bad for the poor people, but they are off a dollar system. Prior in history, we can look at countries like Japan and Germany. They had announced they're coming off the U.S. dollar system, and we know what happened with that. So generally speaking, it hasn't worked out very well for any time they've decided to come off a U.S. hegemony. Sorry, and this one is being allowed to progress very slowly for whatever reasons. I'm sure people will have tons, and it is small. I mean, I think it was J.P. Morgan that said like 80% of all transactions are done in U.S. dollar. It's these other systems are very slow alternative payment systems. They're not really delineated well enough. Never mind the enormity of attempting to do some sort of like tokenized commodity futures exchange with these are amazing, really cool ideas that we can do, like with blockchain and everything else. But just imagine trying to say we're going to do a shift just to like a CBDC Fed coin, but we're also going to tokenize some things. That takes a lot of preparation, a lot of big brain work just to pull off in the best case scenario, with the world being level, easygoing, everything's chill. If you're then saying, well, we want to build an alternative system to that outside, that is, once again, a lot of effort and energy spent to be building a second system, arguably not very efficient for global trade. And if you're an investment banker, if you're a JP Morgan, a Goldman Sachs, a globalist, then you would say, well, why are we doing this? We're wasting time and energy when we could be cooperating and working under the same system. You say, well, yeah, that would be great. But that is that naive worldview that why can't we all just get along? Well, we all can't get along because we're different. And yes, it is more efficient to all use the same system and to all do the same thing. But that's also really boring. That's like saying it would be really interesting if we all lived in the same neighborhood and we're all exactly the same. We all have the same beliefs. And that would make life very boring. It wouldn't be even remotely interesting to live in that world. So we see these fluxes and coming together, whether it's smaller companies, like say with the energy sector, and then they get pulled apart. That's why investment banking M&A exists. You put things together, then you tear them apart. You put them together, then you tear them apart. And the economies of the world ebb and flow in this kind of nature ongoing. We're just seeing a huge cycle of a short period of time with the U.S. being the key driver, kind of the Soviet Union falling apart, crumbling apart under the failure of communism, essentially. Even though people keep trying it and keep trying it and keep trying it, they think that it's a better alternative. And once again, I kind of snicker at it, but it's often a response to ugly, really gross vulture capitalism, like extreme greed. So I get it, like especially when you see the youth today in the West saying, "Oh, I'm a communist," and which baffles me to some degree that you're allowed to go run around and say that, because if you were to actually run around and say you're a fascist, I mean, you'd probably end up in jail in Canada if you were to say that. But you're allowed to say if you're a communist, and that's by far the worst ideology, just by sheer numbers, that's ever existed. So this notion of being, is a response, I'd say, especially with the youngsters here today, is the response of not having opportunity, seeing that the future may not look as bright or hopeful, and to see the extreme greed. And I would say, yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, the push, the way that our economy has been set up, it's not great. And I don't like the word fair. I don't believe in the word fair. That's not really relevant. It's not something I would have any interest in any event. The drive to be a multi-billionaire, to me, just is gross. There's a better word for it, but that has nothing in me that sounds interesting, because you can make a lot of money and have a great lifestyle and be impactful in so many ways, rather than just I've got a bunch of money and then I'm going to take that money and I'm going to try to influence you to do different things. And that I don't like. So for me, the chasing after money for money's sake is about as shallow as one can get. So I would love to see, there's a shift in culture where it's like, yes, having wealth is very important, but wealth doesn't mean just I've got money. And I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's kind of like when you like the idea of someone has class and they go, oh, well, someone's got a lot of money, they've got class. No. A lot of people who have money have zero class. Having class is a type of behavior, and you could be poor and have class. And it's that distinction that I think we need to make again in society, and say, listen, there's an overall good that the average person can have in life, and it isn't this extreme ugliness of vulture capitalism. That shouldn't be respected, shouldn't be adored. That, oh my God, look at them, they've got this. That's no. We should think, no, that's not great. It would be great to hit, and not to stop them. I don't believe in putting a ceiling and saying you can only make that much of that. But if you had a cultural shift, you said, I don't think that's impressive. Then a lot of people wouldn't then strive to want it. And that's part of the problem, is people see someone that lives near them and they go, well, how come they get to have all of that? Well, it's because they built some sort of app that has scale. And you might have a restaurant here in town that does quite well, but that doesn't scale. So it's coming to terms with so many ideas of living in this type of scalable world with computers and everything changing so fast. And then everyone trying to come to terms with what that looks like. And I see that the BRICS, on top of that, is this rejection of a push of ideology, of being forced into doing things you don't want to do, but like a hypocrisy, double standard, as well as the obvious. It doesn't seem sustainable to just print money and once, if you own the printing machine, yeah, no problem. It's sustainable forever. And that was kind of what we talked about on Wednesday with JP Morgan saying, listen, if the U.S. The U.S. doesn't own it. It is a private bank, the Federal Reserve. It's theirs. They can print more. The U.S. is good for it. But other countries, once they get a bit more wealth and they start doing well, they go, well, wait a second. I don't think I like that system. Well, of course they wouldn't. Why would you? And you would feel like, no, you'd have every right to question. I think I would want to have my own printing press. So this is where we're faced now. And would they be wrong for China or Russia or India to say, well, I would like to be able to do that? Of course they would. So I think we have to put on our perspective of what that looks like, and to admit where we're struggling. But also to see if we can come together in some form, a way to go, maybe they've got a good idea with a commodities-backed, gold-backed type of currency. Maybe we should be looking at something like that. Maybe we should be a bit more fiscally responsible. Maybe we shouldn't try to push our ideas onto other people. So the BRICS conversation, I think, is fascinating from a whole bunch of levels. And it isn't touched on very much because it's still small. It's a small idea, but I think that we're going to hear a lot more news, and I don't see things with any of these countries getting any way better. Now, to be on the flip side of that, this BRICS countries, it isn't like the relationship that you'd have between, say, Ireland, Canada, Germany, and the U.S. Traditionally, for the most part, these are the same people, all Europeans. That's obviously changed a great deal in the last couple of decades. But traditionally, these were people that share the same kind of culture, background, ethnicity, everything else. That's not the case with BRICS, not even remotely. We even see like a news headline today where India is saying we should make sure that Pakistan can't join BRICS. There's an issue right there. We have the issue of China and India do not get along, and India has no interest in using the yuan. So I think people, when they look a little bit deeper as well as analyze it, go, ooh, this is a tough friendship to have. And to pull off, to make a system. How is it going to come together? But once again, the flip side, to play devil's advocate, is there common bond of dislike for what's being done to them, or from their perspective, not feeling like it's fair, with the West and the U.S. not wanting to have their this progressive ideology or rejection of that, and saying, no, we're not interested in that, and we don't want to feel like we have to do something, or you put sanctions on us. We want to be able to defend ourselves against that. So I'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts. I think that it has all of those layers embedded into it. I don't think it's going away. I think the story, like 2001, it's been escalating. It's certainly gone well beyond what Jim O'Neill thought, from just being a product idea at Goldman Sachs to it actually becoming a political club. Is it a political ideology, and is it now they've got working on a system? Can they come together and create some sort of currency or something? We're going to get more news here in October, and that's coming up real fast with their meeting in Russia. And we're going to keep our eyes peeled for all that news. Anyways, have a great weekend, everyone. Let me know your feedback. Let me know your thoughts. For us, we always like to bring us back to precious metals. It's going to be good for gold. The 50 basis points, the BRICS, discussion, the debt load of the U.S., all this chaos and change, until we get a sense of we've got energy figured out, we've got a bit more calm of political, settled down kind of, diplomacy in the world, things in the Middle East settle down. Until that happens, there'll be zero reason to not consider safety in gold. If you like Bitcoin, you can go there. It's not really of my interest. And of course, in the meantime, the US dollar, regardless, will still be strong. But you know what? I would prefer to own precious metals than have my any of my money sitting in certainly Canadian dollar, but even a US dollar. Anyways, let me know what your thoughts are. Would love to hear the feedback, and have a great weekend.